Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce my panel, all of whom are doing groundbreaking work in the legal terrain. So I have Oliver Walker, who's a partner in the London office of Weil, Gotshal and Manges, and he co-chairs their Wellness and Social Committee. Then I have Rebecca Priestley, who's the Chief Executive of Outer Temple Chambers, where she's made mental health and well-being a key priority. Then we have James Gray, a patent attorney and partner at Withers and Rogers. He's a member of the Diversity and Inclusion team and focuses on mental health. Then I have Moira Slape, the HR director at Travers Smith. She's led the firm's well-being strategy from its inception to where they are now. And finally, Matt Morgan, who's a partner at international law firm Pinsent Masons. He's been heavily involved in developing and implementing the firm's mental health strategy. In terms of the shape of the session, we'll be having a discussion and then we'll have a few questions at the very end. So research in both the UK and internationally just shows very disappointing statistics when it comes to well-being in the legal profession. Just to give you a couple of examples, the Law Society of England and Wales holds an annual survey amongst the junior lawyers division. This year was its third year. And of 1,800 respondents, the figure for those who had experienced mental health problems in the month preceding the survey was 46%. On the other side of the pond, the American Bar Association carried out a survey in 2017, which showed that 28% of lawyers had depression, 19% anxiety, and 23% were stressed. But there is good news. Progress is being made, and our panelists are all at organizations which are making strides in changing the narrative around mental health, and they're embracing the preventative side of the equation and not just responding with crisis management. So let's dive in by looking at the legal terrain. And I'll start with you, Oliver. Sure. What are the challenges in the legal environment that don't align with good mental health?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very demanding job. I mean, it's a well-paid job. It can be a well-paid job, but also very demanding. The hours can be very long. So I know plenty of lawyers who will bill 3,000 hours a year, which is around eight hours a day, every day, all year round. I mean, that's an average. Which is obviously not the best thing for a work-life balance or for maintaining a decent social life. The demands can be unpredictable. They can come in at any given moment. A client could ask for a piece of work on a Friday evening, due the following Monday, or indeed over the weekends. But the actual job itself is inherent with its own demands. So, I'm a tax lawyer, and my job is to spot risk, effectively, spot problems, try and solve them, sure, but the first job is to spot problems, which is true of many lawyers, actually. And that isn't exactly conducive to positive thinking if you're looking for problems in the first place. And, of course, you're giving advice that can save or cost the client huge amounts of money. But the thing is, I think, about the legal profession is that every job is demanding in its own right, I'm sure. But those elements that make the job demanding are actually the things that attract lawyers to the profession in the first place. In many cases, it's that the air of unpredictability, being able to be creative, having your clients, trust your advice, and that pressure that comes with those sorts of things is actually sort of catnip for some people, and that's kind of the issue. I think that being suited to a job doesn't mean necessarily that you're suited to its effects.
Absolutely. Well, I'm hearing there the pressures in the environment and also, to an extent, the personality type.
Yeah, that's right.
And as we all know, that the legal profession is broadly split into solicitors and barristers. And Rebecca, I'd love to hear from you on your perspective around the pressures that barristers are under.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lubna, and good afternoon, everybody. So I think that barristers have a sort of a unique, heady mix of factors which make for a particularly stressful environment, sort of potentially. And I speak both as the Chief Executive of a Barristers' Chambers, which is my current role, and also having spent the first 6 years of my life as a barrister, so I've experienced that sort of firsthand. And I think you've got a combination of high stress, preparing often at pace, under a very tight deadline, You're then going to go to court where, and often you will have gone to court sort of possibly when you're very junior, haven't got the papers literally the night before. You've got to arrive at court, sometimes meet your client for the first time. You've got to have marshalled your facts, your argument, your cross-examination, and you've got to spend that day managing your case, your client, who will be in a high-stress situation, your professional client, your opponent, often a taciturn judge, and your own nerves all in a day's work. So it's high octane, it's high adrenaline. The highs of doing a great cross-examination, doing a great case, getting a good result for your client are fantastic, but the time and the pressure that goes into that preparation and that run-up is really quite unique. And I remember doing this myself. As a very junior lawyer, I practiced mainly in family and employment law. I had my first child 20 years ago. She was 6 months old, and I had to go and do a sexual harassment case down at Exeter Employment Tribunal. It was 3 days, staying in a glamorous travel lodge outside the tribunal, away from my small child, acting for the company and the defendant against a claimant who brought her entire family to the tribunal. So every time I even went to the loo, I'd sort of meet one member of her family who were not sort of best pleased with me as sort of counsel acting on the other side. I think the other particularly unique factor for barristers is that they are self-employed. So they work within a chambers as a sort of group of members and under that chambers banner, but they are essentially self-employed. So there's a particular factor where they don't have the same infrastructure of benefits should they fall sick or need time off for mental health. And also, there is a really, really strong perception and probably a degree of reality that you're hired for your personal resilience, and that's both your physical and mental resilience. And that particular factor, the fact that if you're not instructed, you don't work, you won't get paid, the barrister's sort of paranoia is about not getting repeat work means that disclosing the fact that you have a mental health issue is particularly challenging. And there was a survey recently done by the Bar Council on wellbeing, who are doing some fantastic work in this space, that 3 out of 4 barristers said that displaying signs of stress equaled weakness. So that just gives you a bit of an indication of how far I think the profession has got to go, possibly even to catch up with the solicitor profession and in the city.
Yeah, I can absolutely see why there's that reluctance to show any vulnerability. And, at the same time, where we are with our fluency around mental health and the narrative that we have, there can also be a reluctance to acknowledge that mental health is even an issue. And James, I'd really love for you to share your story of how you had that perspective shift from not really being, acknowledging mental health to actually being very much in the forefront of promoting good mental health.
Yes, thank you, Lubna. I, 5 years ago, had to step back from my position in the business for an extended period as a result of stress brought on by work. And with hindsight, there are various things that I could have done better and should have recognised, one being that the way in which I trained for 20 years, it was expected of me to do late nights and over weekends and things, isn't very good for you. The issue I had was that I was leading a team. I required a very large new client. It required a lot of work to bring this client on board. And I found myself completely buried in the work. And at first I felt, well, I've been here before. I've had to work hard to get things through. Just put your head down, you work through, and you'll get through it. And it became apparent after some weeks that wasn't actually going to happen. And I did actually have a problem. And at that point, your mind shifted to think, well, and as was said there, this idea of weakness, you didn't want to show that you had a problem because that could be perceived as weakness, both to a client who is entrusted you to do this job and has chosen your firm through to do the job. There's also a perception of weakness within your fellow partners in the business. Certainly the career track within law firms can be quite competitive, and you feel you want to always position yourself in the best possible light amongst your peers. There was also a fear of not wanting to overburden the people I'm working with. They're already busy, and if I'm not around, then they're going to be even busier, and I didn't want that to happen. And there's finally this issue I think that some lawyers and people about the IP profession get, is that you possibly mistakenly believe you're more important than you actually are, that you think that I've got to actually do this, I've got to bring this in, because if I'm not here, then the whole thing's going to collapse. And those sort of factors delay you from getting help, I think, until you get to the point actually you can't go on, and you've got to step back. But in having been through this, it's now being able to remove any stigma in the business regarding talking about these aspects and make sure that people are able to raise them and know there's a support network in the business to support them if they are having problems.
Thank you for sharing that. And that visible leadership is key. And I mean, it's probably true of most professions, but certainly in the legal profession, and you know, when I was training in a junior lawyer, there is that thing of having to follow the partner. And we're very driven and we do what partners do. And so it's such an important part of the equation. And sort of I just wanted to look at that issue of leadership buy-in in a bit more detail. Moira, I know that at Travers Smith, you started from having an absolute, nothing in place at all to where you are now 4 years later. What did you do that was successful in obtaining leadership buy-in?
Yeah, so just picking up on the context, so I arrived 4 years ago at Travers Smith, and I think it'd be fair to say that we had done little around health and well-being in its broadest sense, and that's not to criticise what had happened before, it's just that there just weren't the resources. So that's just making my colleagues in the room feel a bit better, who were here at that time. The other point that had happened in the firm is we'd had an interesting change of leadership. So our current managing partner, he finished his last term in about 18 months, and he'd started as managing partner about 8 months before I came on board. And he's been quite an interesting catalyst for change in the firm, and part of his manifesto to the partnership was that he was going to drive change, not affecting our culture, but improving and enhancing our culture, but also making sure that he was going to champion people like me and other colleagues of mine within business services to bring in professionals who could really help the partnership be better leaders, essentially. So there's the leadership around the board and David, the managing partner's role. We'd also formed a relatively new partnership board. And so for me, relatively speaking, I had sort of an open door, I suppose. But I had to tread very carefully because Travers Smith culturally is a firm that really prides itself on its culture. We have a very sort of supportive environment, and we consult a lot. So there have been times during my journey where I've got quite frustrated, if I'm honest with you, and I remember sitting down with two partners who, because we're dealing with lawyers, I'm not going to criticise you now, guys, but you like words, and I'd written this beautiful document about how we were going to shape our mental health first aid agenda, and it just got picked to pieces. And it wasn't about my intent, I don't think. It was a little bit about words, but it was actually about fear. And it was about fear from some partners who just thought, this is just all so raw and new, and how can I take responsibility for having to deal with people's issues? And so there was a bit of a struggle that I had sort of psychologically to sort of get over that. But you just keep going and you keep going. So through just doing an awful lot of stuff that everyone in this room has done, seminars, people like Johnny and Neil coming to talk to us, various mindfulness speakers, and then really bringing to life storytelling. I think there was a moment about 2 years ago where we had a bit of a game-changing sort of moment where we had a panel of partners and lawyers and someone from business services just talking about the struggles that they'd faced. And so that was a point in time where I think people just got it. And then the final thing I'll just chunt on about before I stop. Something that's unique to Travers Smith is that we don't actually have chargeable hours targets. So we don't have our lawyers, they record their time, but they don't actually have a clock that ticks. So that makes us a little bit different. And we also have a room system where a partner will share a room with 3, in some cases 4 associates, ranging from trainees up to senior lawyers. So there is a sense of mini cultures within a culture, and it's all very supportive, but partners just feeling this huge sense of responsibility, I think, at times, to have all the answers. And I suppose people like me and my amazing team are there to, facilitate and help and educate.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And Oliver, I know that you were in a similar position at your firm in terms of actually developing a strategy very quickly. What would you say was key for you in terms of getting leadership buy-in?
Yeah, so Rebecca mentioned just briefly earlier this fear of showing sort of stress or not being resilient, and I think within law firms that's what we struggle with. I think the fear of showing weakness, of not being resilient enough to cope with the demands of the job. Whether you show it to the clients or whether you're showing it to your colleagues, and if you're an associate, whether you're showing weakness to your partner, therefore you're getting a promotion, and so it goes. And I think, about 10 years ago, at my law firm, I think at other law firms too, the conversation was about resilience. How do we increase resilience? How do we ensure resilience? And now it isn't so much that. The program at Weil, where we are now, is we are talking about mental health openly in the corridors at the T point, and we got from A to B through actually a journey that I've been hearing about a lot today at other panels and other talks, where you start with simply trying to achieve cultural change by raising awareness of the issues, having it out in the open. You do that by just continually banging on about it, frankly, with talks, emails, flyers at the T points. We created a wellness committee that would sort of steer the program, but with huge help and guidance from our HR team. And then you move from that to normalising it. So you start a discussion, then you normalise the discussion. It's normal to talk about mental health. I was sceptical that we could even achieve that, but we managed it, I think, within a few months, which was amazing. And you achieve that by, Johnny and Neil coming to see us, by having interactive sessions and discussion groups. And then you go from that to actually, offering meaningful support to people in the office. And now we have in-house psychotherapists who come and spend time in the office and take sessions with our people. We have sort of all sorts of things set up now, which is fantastic. But that isn't the end of it. I mean, it's sort of we are where we are now, and we're going to carry on going with that. And the next step for us is to sort of look at data, figure out what we've learned, pick out some themes, and then go a bit deeper.
Brilliant. So what I'm hearing is this cascade, almost starting with what people are ready for, and then gradually building on that.
And so all of that isn't possible without buy-in from leadership, from the very top. If you haven't got that, then no one's going to say anything about anything. You need to have an open discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just jump in? Sorry, just on that point. I think it's also a bit about how brave you want to be. And I remember earlier this year we ran a mental health month rather than a week. And I remember going to talk to probably about 10 or 12 partners in the context of consultation about the fact that I wanted to bring in somebody who's an expert on suicide, and she ran this amazing session on suicide prevention and awareness. And there were some partners who were sort of, oh, Moira, I'm really not quite sure this is where you want to go. And with some leadership buy-in to that point, we just did it. Yeah. It just felt instinctively the right thing to do, and it was the right thing to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just on that sort of one issue, just jumping in and just letting the buy-in follow, as it were. Yeah. So I'm sure we all know that the internal culture is just one piece to a very complex puzzle. And I'm sure that all of us know that one of the biggest stresses can always be our clients, and we often can't avoid them. And Matt, I know that you've been instrumental in the Mindful Business Charter, which is an initiative initially between clients and lawyers looking at principles for how they can manage their working relationship. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, of course, thank you. So we can't avoid our clients. They're quite important to the business model. So, the Mindful Business Charter came from a conversation 2 years ago between our senior partner and a senior lawyer at Barclays. And they were both talking about their respective strategies with mental health and how we're dealing with the consequences of mental ill health at work. And I think the conversation just moved on to, well, hang on, are we impacting each other? Are we causing some of this? And is there anything we can do to actually look at the front end of this and try and avoid some of the triggers before they get to the consequences, if you like? And so from that, Kate was tasked with creating something from that. And that became the Mindful Business Charter. So it was us and Barclays and Adelshaws originally. But there were two elements to it. So one was the client engagement side, and we're never going to get rid of all of the stress in work. We've heard already how, that's inherent in what we do, really. There will always be tight deadlines, there'll be targets. We can't get rid of that. And also, workplace stress is not the only cause of stress for lots of people. So we're never going to deal with it completely. But the Mindful Business Charter was around trying to reduce some of the avoidable stress in work. If you get asked to do something by Monday morning, is the client actually going to read it on Monday morning, or are they going to read it on Thursday? And that's where those conversations came from. So there's two elements to it. I think there's the law firm client engagement piece, and then actually what I think is more important is how we've then turned that into how we treat each other. So I hate the phrase internal client, but actually anybody who delegates a piece of work, anybody who supervises anybody else, is having an impact on their stress levels, their mental health. So we've got two elements to it. One is the client engagement piece, and I've heard a lot this morning about empowerment. And I think the important thing for us with having people like Barclays and other corporates involved in the Mindful Business Charter is that they're empowering us to have those conversations with them to say, do you really need this piece of work? Do you want it then? Do you need it? So that's enabled us to have those open conversations. But then the second piece is internally. So we've turned the charter, the principles of the charter, into a code of conduct, effectively. And deliberately, we didn't call it a partner code of conduct. It's anybody, as I say, anybody who's a line manager. You don't need to be a lawyer. You know, anybody who's in that position of responsibility. We've turned that into a code of conduct. We took soundings internally as to what the juniors felt was important to them. We've created this code, and then we've developed that into, we've launched that in one part of the business. And we've held, to see where we are against that code initially, because you need to know where you are to start with. We've had what we've called Speak Your Mind sessions with some of the juniors and had the feedback. And then, which is more difficult, what do you do with that feedback? You know, we've had to sit down with some of the groups and say, actually, this is some of the behaviours that, you know, you're not doing all the time, but you are doing some of the time, and they're impacting people's stress levels. So we're now up to, and it's not a Pinsent Masons thing, by the way, I should say, Mindful Business Charter, it's anybody can join, it's free. We're now up to 38 signatories, 30 of which are law firms, but what's really good is that we're getting more corporate, more client engagement with it now. So some of the banks have signed up, but also just corporates. And it's creating conversations with clients that you just couldn't have 3 years ago, I don't think. And, you know, it's creating a space. And I've had conversations where people have said, that's ridiculous, you know, I still want it tomorrow morning. Of course, we're always going to get that. But I hope that those clients in 3 or 5 years are the ones who are even more open to it. So I think it's changing the landscape, and it's having a big impact in our firm.
And I know that it's just over its first year into the Mindful Business Charter. So just sort of in a nutshell, what would you say isn't working around it?
Internally?
More in the sort of relationship between the clients and the law firms.
Well, it's, and as I say, there will always be those stresses, there will always be those deadlines, but it's giving us a space to challenge some of those, to say, does the meeting have to be at 8:30? Actually, one of the key people on my team does drop off. Can we do it at 9:30? And I don't think we, as the law firm, as the bottom of the food chain, if you like, as I always think about it, we're able to ask those questions in the past. We just had to do what we were told. And I think that's the benefit for me, that it's creating a space where we can just try and have more open, grown-up conversations.
Great, thank you. Rebecca, I know that before you were in your current role, which is quite a new role for you, you were Director of People at Lloyds Banking Group.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you observed there outside of the legal profession that you've already brought in to your new role or that you're planning to bring in?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, as Emma said, I was a People Director for Employee Relations at Lloyds Banking Group before coming to my new role in January. And Lloyds, as you may be aware, has done a phenomenal amount in the mental health space and has been, you know, a real trailblazer in this work. And we also work there with the City Mental Health Alliance, which some of you may also be aware of, which I'm a non-executive director of, which does a lot of work with law firms, financial services and other professional services to create mentally healthy workplaces. I would say there's sort of 3 key things from Lloyds that I've learned that I think sort of translate everywhere, although how you actually embed them will probably be rooted in the reality of where you work and the particular sort of factors around that workplace, which may be different. I think the first one, and people really have touched on all these 3 areas, but the first one is socialising mental health into your business. So it's really about normalising the conversation about mental health, challenging stigma, raising awareness. And there were a number of ways that this was done at Lloyd's, but I would say the most powerful way by far was by the sharing of personal stories. So our CEO, as you may also be aware, told his own sort of personal story about a period he had of absence related to stress, both sort of internally and externally, and very publicly. That was phenomenally powerful, because the fact that, you know, the most senior leader in the organisation would tell his story, and the cascade effect that that had around the organisation and making it safe to talk about those issues was incredibly powerful. I know this myself because I had a period of time when I was a leader. I was responsible for a large team. We were taking 70,000 people through significant change in the organisation. And that at that time, my eldest daughter, who was then 16, was hospitalised with anorexia for 5 months and was incredibly ill. She nearly died. And initially, I just thought, I can't say anything about this work, partly because I thought I'd break down, partly because I thought, as a senior leader, it's my job to lead other people through change, and that's, you know, I need to be supporting my team. And I think also, really honestly, partly through a fear of stigma. You know, anorexia is quite an ill-understood illness. I, at the time, felt to a degree that I'd failed as a mother, because I felt that your first duty as a mother is to feed your child, and my daughter was trying to starve herself to death, so I stayed silent. That changed, in fact, through working with an executive coach who I saw at the time, who I went to see. Poor chap, I sort of sat down the first meeting and he said, "Tell me about yourself," and I burst into tears. So I don't think I was quite the thrusting executive that he had in mind, but he was fantastic. And he said, actually, 2 things. One, your leadership team probably is aware, and secondly, actually, if you tell them, it will help them, it will help you. He was right on both fronts. I told my team, and in due course, actually shared my story with the 1,000 people in the HR department. My daughter by then had sort of blogged about her experiences as well. And the power of that was phenomenal. And the same with the CEO. So many people came forward and shared their personal stories. And I think that's about normalising it. It's about translating it from showing weakness. Actually, as a senior leader, your job is not to be invulnerable. We all are human, and we all will have times that challenge our mental health. And actually showing, you know, that that's not fatal, it's not career-ending, that, you know, we also need help, I think is really important. So I think the sort of second part of learning from Lloyd's was the development of skills and literacy around mental health. So, you know, we did quite a lot of work where we actually went out, and it's partly about asking your people, what do they need and what's going to help them. We went out and talked to line managers who were actually really quite fearful if either they thought a member of their team had a mental health issue or they wanted to ask somebody about their mental well-being. They were worried about saying the wrong thing, making the situation worse, etc. So we deployed a tool manager's kit, a line manager's toolkit across the whole organisation. There was also a lot of work done within Lloyd's for resilience for leaders, which was both mental and physical health, and it was very interesting sitting with, you know, senior, sort of hard-bitten men, sort of in their 50s, doing mindfulness, you know, training. A lot of cynicism initially, but actually huge buy-in and a hugely powerful input. And I think the last point, which again echoes something that Oliver was saying, is about sustaining change. You have to have buy-in from the business. It has to be part of your business strategy. It has to be led by your business leaders in order for it to be successful. So I think sort of bringing that round to the bar, which is obviously a completely different environment, you know, what I'd like to do is to try and get us to a place where we're not going to have everybody bare their soul, I think, because of this unique setup of the bar, but actually providing infrastructure within chambers of people to be able to access support if they need it, beginning to normalise the debate, sharing best practice within the legal profession, and actually, you know, if we can get some senior leaders to talk about experiences they had and the fact it wasn't career-ending, I think that will be phenomenally powerful, and I'd like to see more of that.
Mm. Well, there's a lot there in terms of, you know, reversing stigma and opening up culture. I'd just like to move on now and to actually hear from all of you around what you think the key factor is in establishing long-term culture change. And perhaps I could start with you, James.
Well, I think it's something that has been said before, is that you've got to keep on at it. You know, just by realising that you need to put some provisions in place and putting them there isn't enough. You really have to make sure this conversation continues. We have an intranet which fires up when everyone puts their computer on in the morning, And health and well-being and diversity and inclusivity are stories that come up onto that when people fire the computer up. So they're made aware of initiatives that we are running or events that are taking place, both within our business and also within an organisation called IP Inclusive, which is set up between the Chartered Institute of Patent and Trademark Attorneys and the UK Intellectual Property Office to look at the pressures in the IP industry. They had an awareness week beginning of November for the second year running. And this is something we actively promote, and we almost want to get to the point where people are saying, oh, not again. But if it's there, it's in their mind. They're taking notice of it.
Great. And Moira, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the language or the phrase that I use to keep it as simple as possible is, we're going to continue increasing the literacy around mental health. So, as an example, we're not just full of a firm of lawyers and young associates. We've got a whole team of people who are there supporting the lawyers. So we have a PA community, average age probably is about 53, 54, probably all of them going through or having gone through the menopause. So we've run a couple of sessions in the last year looking at the implications of mental health when someone is travelling through the menopause and whatever that looks like. So we've sort of looked at it as broadly as we can rather than what might be the more obvious signs. So we have a sort of a bunch of women, and I go along because I've also got patches, and we talk about what that is like and what experiences people have. So anything that we can do that isn't necessarily massively innovative but just touches people, I think really that's where we've had our focus, and that's how we use this term increasing or improving literacy.
Yeah. It's almost through widening the nets and actually pulling people in who might not otherwise be drawn in.
Yeah.
Matt's?
I'd agree with that. I also think senior buy-in, and it needs to be authentic senior buy-in. It's not just lip service. They really need to lead from the front on it. And by doing that, that then empowers the next level, the partners, the biz ops leaders, to change in their teams, because the senior management can't touch everybody. But if they are authentic and they lead from the top, then that empowers the next level to really push and make that change. You only make the cultural change if everybody's involved and buys into it.
On that note, I wonder if any of you have a solution in terms of senior buy-in. Certainly in law firms, perhaps in other industries as well, there is sometimes, and it can be a generational thing, an attitude of, well, it was like this in my day, you just had to grin and bear it and just be resilient, and it's your responsibility. Has anyone found a way through that?
I recognise that completely. I've come across that myself time and again. I think you'll have. Persistence is key. Just keeping on at it. Actually, what I've found is that there is initial scepticism, maybe from a certain generation, without wishing to paint with a massively broad brush, but there may be some scepticism around it. But the results speak for themselves. When your workforce is happier, more productive, more efficient, doing a better job, making more money, it's hard to argue against. And actually, when you have people, openly discussing these various sort of recently taboo subjects, but doing it openly, there's clearly something in it, and it's harder to argue against. And also, times are changing, and the young lawyers coming up, they've had a different upbringing in terms of what they expect from their employer, what they expect from their career. It isn't the case that you enter a law firm, do 7 years, meet a partner, play golf on a Friday, retire at 50. That's finished. It's a longer career, and people want more out of it. And part of that is actually, a kinder place to work.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. There's one, the money. The amount that's lost to the economy and to businesses through poor mental health is massive. Secondly, I think times are changing. I think that whole demographic of cradle to grave in one employer is different, and I think actually there is a recruitment factor about this in that people who are graduates are looking for places that are going to be positive about mental health. And I think also the final thing is that actually anybody, whatever their sort of perceptions or position are, will not have gone through their life unaffected by mental ill health, whether it's in their family, their colleagues, their friends. So I think although there may be initial resistance, actually scratch the surface and one might find that that's an initial reaction and can be changed.
Interesting. Just curious to know what the main obstacles that any of you have faced along the way, and perhaps I could start with you, Moira.
Of developing
Yeah.
an agenda. I think I used the word earlier. I think fear. So this whole point about leadership buy-in in a partnership. We have in my firm we have 84 partners, different generations. To your point, the younger partners coming through just get it more than the other elder partners do, and I think that the older partners are not as equipped, and they're probably not as broad-minded because it was always done the way that they did it. So I hear my team will say to me, "Oh, you can't believe what John said the other day." It was like, "Well, grow some balls, excuse me." Well, that's just not okay. So I think the obstacle is partly around fear, and it's just partly about that's just the way it's always been in the profession. Interestingly, we had some interesting feedback from a couple of trainees who were at law fairs and presentations recently. We've just come through that sort of period, and they said that there were more students asking them about our commitment to mental health and well-being. So I think if we can have younger people challenging the status quo, I think that will help remove the obstacle, hopefully.
Yeah.
Like, it will take time, but I think the generational issues that we have are a problem.
There was actually a question which has disappeared now that was around the issue of graduates, but I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think that answered that particular question, so that was really helpful.
Just on another point, this idea of the changing demographic of people coming into the industry is making us look at alternative career paths, because not everyone who comes in now wants to be a partner with the perceived stress and the hours. So we have to look at other ways of accommodating people who are very good technically but don't want to be in the position that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else want to contribute to that? So, final question, I think. I'm just sort of picking up these questions. Do we think that the legal industry is on the right track?
I do. Yeah, I really do. I mean, from the signatures we've got of the MBC, 30 law firms, and just from talking to people, friends at other firms, it is a big issue, but we are addressing it in the sector, I think. I think, every firm is now talking about this and has strategies around it. And I think the legal profession is ahead in lots of this stuff. You look at the Stonewall Index, for instance, in a different sphere, but still in well-being, and there's lots of law firms there. So I think firms do recognise in this sector the issues around that and around their people.
I think there's calls for optimism. I think, there's so much, you just hear what everybody's doing, I'm sure people in this room are doing, and I think, there's obviously a way to go still, but I think there is a sustained commitment to, to promoting wellbeing at work in the legal profession, so I think there is considerable calls for optimism.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, and I think the other thing to remember here, of course, is that, the average lawyer wants to feel that they're going to be a high achiever. So they're joining a profession where I think they know they're going to be stretched, they know they're going to be challenged. I think they know that the deal is long hours, not all the time. But and I think as long as we can balance that with support and really authentic support, to your point, I think we are getting there. Definitely. I mean, I've been in the legal sector now and learning and development HR roles for 20 years, and it's come a long, long way in that time, significantly. But then I'm not a lawyer, so maybe I look at it a little bit differently. But that's my lens. That's the only thing I can benchmark it against, I think. Yeah.
Did you think
Maybe just say, are we on the right track? And the lawyer answer to that is define what track means. What is this track? Right direction. I'd like to go faster. I think on this panel, we are seeing change where we work, and that's great. I wonder about the wider legal community. There are plenty of firms that aren't engaging in this, and so there's a lot more to be done within this room and outside this room.
Yeah. And I think on that note, I think, it's one of the areas we think of lawyers, most of us, as being quite hard-nosed and maybe ruthless. But one of the things that I've observed is the degree of collaboration between lawyers, or even lawyers and their clients, which is certainly very encouraging. We have got to exactly 0000, the end of time. So all that remains is for me to say thank you so much to my panelists, and obviously thank you so much to all of you for spending this 40 minutes with us.